Hi, I'm Anna James, author of Alyce with a Y, which is illustrated by Matthew Land. And this is the Blackwell's Book of the Month for July. So this is a return to Wonderland, and it tells the story of Alyce with a Y, who is the granddaughter of the original Alyce as she stumbles back into Wonderland. And I'm here to answer some questions from Darcey.
First question is, what does the spelling of the character's name represent in the story and for Alyce as a character?
So there's a few things that went into this. So I wanted my Alyce to have like a direct link to the original Alyce. And so the fact that they have the same name works really nicely to tie them together very obviously and for the title of the book, but obviously needed to mix it up a little bit. And Lewis Carroll's Wonderland is full of nonsense and wordplay and double meanings and puns. And of course, Alyce and the Y works really nicely to have the alternate spelling, so an alternate version of a similar character, but also of course the letter Y, but also the word WHY kind of works with that Wonderlandy feel of nonsense and double meanings, but it also speaks to the fact that both of the Alyces, the original Alyce and my Alyce, are often being asked who they are and why they're there. So those are the kind of things that tangle together to get me to Alyce with a Y.
My next question is, are there any hidden references in the book that the readers might not notice on first read?
So again, in the original, it's packed full of references and Easter eggs to history, politics, art, literature, maths, all sorts of things. Lewis Carroll's book is packed full of all sorts of references. So I really wanted to honour that feel. So there's an awful lot of references in there to all sorts of things from around the time that the book is set, which is 1919, just after the end of the First World War, and also older as well. And there's also references to the original book. There's a lot of kind of obvious cameos and references, but there's some very small little nods back to the original book as well. Some of the kind of historical references to the time period that the book is set in, one of the obvious ones is that when my Alyce goes back to Wonderland, Wonderland is actually at war because the Sun King has stolen an hour from the Queen of the Moon, and that came from the fact that British summertime was actually introduced during the First World War, so that hour kind of moved around a bit, and that's where that grew from. So there's a lot of some obvious, some less obvious references to that coming in, but also the Sun King is a reference to the Sun King Louis XIV and Versailles. He lives in a hall of mirrors, but the Treaty of Versailles ended the First World War. So there's all sorts of references for you to hopefully enjoy keeping track of.
My next question is, who is your favourite supporting character in the book and why?
So my favourite supporting character in Alyce with a Y has to be the fox that my Alyce meets. So when she goes to Wonderland, she is sent off by the Hatter to try and find the time being to help solve this war that's happening. And she's sent to get her papers from this fox who mans a checkpoint. And she meets this fox who has his own paper boat, and he becomes her guide through Wonderland. And as well as having sort of some of that nonsensical Wonderland feel, he's also a very kind and wise character, and Alyce and the fox's relationship really forms the kind of emotional backbone of the story.
Question 4. Was there a moment in writing Alyce's story where she surprised you, took a narrative direction in a time you did not expect?
So actually, for this book, probably less than any other book I've written, there wasn't necessarily any big surprises. I think that the nature of writing in Wonderland, which has a very particular feel and rhythm with the nonsense and the wordplay, and it's quite a short book. It's the same length as the original book, which is quite short. It means I felt like I had to have quite a tight control on what I was wanting to do with it to get it to work. So there wasn't necessarily any big narrative surprises, perhaps less so than when I'm writing my fantasy series. But I did let the kind of dialogue do what it needed and as I wrote it. So the very first scene I wrote was when the Hatter is first talking to Alyce, and they have a lot of back and forth and wordplay, and I really just let that kind of go as I was writing it, saw what happened next. And that was really how I found my way into the voice of the book, and also that exchange really kind of helped me understand who Alyce was and what her purpose was in Wonderland. So it was a bit of a different writing experience, this book. Less surprises, but more fun, maybe, in a lot of ways.
My last question is, use language and narrative voice to reflect Alyce's emotional world?
So one thing that's really important about understanding Wonderland, as far as I understand it, is that Wonderland is a child's view of adulthood, not an adult's view of childhood. And lots of children's books often are the other way around. So kind of the whole of Wonderland is using language and narrative voice about the experience of being a child in a world that's set up for adults. So, you know, rules that don't make sense or feel contradictory, or things that are only, you're asked to do something and it's only explained to you afterwards why, and even then it doesn't always quite make sense, and people are telling you two different things. And so I think that understanding that and capturing that in the narrative voice was actually key to the whole book. So kind of using language to get that contradictory, nonsensical feel, which mirrors the way that Alyce is feeling as she kind of finds her way in Wonderland, but also finds her way in the real world. So in the book, she's just lost her dad during the war. And so just as she's trying to find her way through Wonderland, she's also trying to find her way through this new world of hers in real life where her dad isn't there.
Bonus question! Do you see Alyce with a Y as a coming of age story, or is it more about becoming visible to oneself and others?
Now, I'm a big believer that books are whatever readers made of them. So if you read Alyce with a Y as a coming of age story, or a book about becoming visible to yourself, then that is all okay by me. I think for me, it's not necessarily how I kind of approached it. And these things overlap with ideas around coming of age. But as I mentioned, the book is really about Alyce negotiating the world, having lost her dad. It's about kind of this new world for her, both in the grand scale after the end of the First World War, and then also in the very, very personal, intimate way where her family is kind of working out who they are without their dad there. So it's a bit more perhaps about grief and how we negotiate a new world when something big has changed or we've lost someone big, and how it can be really hard and really difficult, but we will be okay, and that we have within us the strength to keep going even when things are really difficult. But of course, you know, Wonderland is full of questions about who we are, who we want to be, growing. There's lots of growing and shrinking, and all of that lends itself to kind of ideas around growing up and coming of age. So those themes totally are there, but it's not necessarily the kind of headline of how I perceived it as a writer. But books are for readers. So I really feel like however you want to enjoy the book, whether it is about growing up, whether it's about grief and loss, whether it's about the historical setting, whether it's about the wordplay and nonsense of Wonderland, this book is for readers, and I hope that you get something from it.
Thank you for taking the time to answer my questions. Darcey out.